Hey comrades, how's it going? My name is William Morrison. I'm your British Marxist-Leninist and anti-imperialist comrade based in Scotland. And as you can see, this is a different kind of video. You can hear my voice, but you can't see me. That's because I'm screen recording and I'm going to be debunking this 9-minute video. It's a Channel 4 news clip on Xi Jinping meeting Vladimir Putin in Russia. A lot of the video contains just these imperialist sound bites, these imperialist lies. And as an anti-imperialist and as a communist, I'd like to clearly air and clear up some misinformation that is spread in this video. And I want to give some people a different alternative perspective on what's happening regarding Russia and China, because a lot of people in the West will not be receiving the correct information, or it will be extremely biased towards imperialism and neoliberalism. And that's extremely harmful, and it's not true, a lot of it. So I'm going to be debunking it. So yeah, you're in for a treat. It should be entertaining. When I watched this for the first time, found it very entertaining, just because of how ridiculous some of these arguments were. So I'll just go ahead and I'll just go ahead.
Even dictators need friends, and the bromance between Xi Jinping...
Okay, actually, first of all, just to clear off, I'm not going to pause this a lot, but even dictatorships have friends. What actually is a democracy and what is a dictatorship? These are not actually defined things. And democracy and dictatorship is not a universal concept. Democracy looks different everywhere. In every country, democracy looks slightly different. That's because democracy is tailored to national conditions. So democracy will look everywhere. It will look different everywhere. That should be a given. So if you went to China and surrounded yourself with Chinese culture and you asked Chinese people what they thought democracy was, they'd probably say, well, democracy for me is being free and being safe and being healthy, having a good education, having access to good healthcare, having a government that looks after me. That to them is democracy. But of course, in the West, in the Western liberal democracies, that isn't necessarily what democracy is. Democracy is something different, and that's fine. Democracy is different wherever it is. So you can't just start off by saying, this is a democracy, this is a dictatorship. It can't be that black and white. There's more nuance to this that isn't being looked at. But I just wanted to clear that up.
And Vladimir Putin has been going strong for over a decade. Russia was Xi's first foreign trip in office, and they've now met 40 times. During the Beijing Olympics, they declared there was no limit to their friendship. Then, just days later, Russia invaded Ukraine, catching China by surprise.
Yeah, so China was not surprised at all when Russia carried out their special military operation and denazification of Ukraine. China weren't surprised at all. In fact, in the Chinese kind of parliament or the Politburo, Chinese politicians had been mentioning the fact that Russian and Ukrainian relationships had been deteriorating. They had been mentioning this as far back as 2019. So about 4 years China has been mentioning this, so they were not surprised at all. Again, that is absolute nonsense.
But dear friends, as they call each other, stick together. This was the Chinese leader in Moscow this afternoon, Putin's first visitor since the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for him last week.
Yeah, it'll be the first visitor, but it certainly won't be the last visitor. Most of Africa and most of Latin America, for example, support Russia, and many of their leaders will of course continue to have diplomatic relations with China, and that will obviously require them meeting up occasionally. So yeah, that really doesn't really mean anything, to be honest. Most of the world is actually behind Russia, and the Western community is actually only about 15% of global countries. So with that perspective, then of course it's going to be a surprise, but to most of the world, no, things will continue on as normal.
China attaches great importance to China-Russia relations because we are each other's biggest neighboring country, as well as strategic partners.
The reason the world is watching this public display of affection, of course, its possible impact on the war in Ukraine.
We have carefully studied your proposals on settling the acute crisis in Ukraine. You're aware that we're always open to a negotiation process.
Away from the sweet talk on the battlefield, Russia is making marginal gains, edging closer to taking the blood-soaked city of Bakhmut after months of frenzied assaults. The war is not going Putin's way. He's exhausting his manpower and resources. A humiliating defeat for Russia and a victory for America and its allies.
Whoa. I'm sorry, what? Wait, I'm sorry. You can't say that. You just contradicted yourself there. You can't say that Russia is making gains and then in the same sentence say that the war isn't going Russia's way and that's the West. This is going to be a victory for the West, or this is a victory for the West. You can't say that. That's absolute nonsense. Conservative estimates indicate that 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers are dying every day on the front line. And the numbers for Russian troops are nowhere near that high. They're a fraction of that number. And around 40 to 60,000 Russian troops have died since the start of the war, whereas hundreds of thousands estimated Ukrainians have been killed, or about 150,000, I think it is now, have died on the Ukrainian side. This is an absolute annihilation. Ukraine is being absolutely annihilated by Russian forces. This is a victory for Russia, and they just admitted that Russia have been making gains. So you can't say, no, I'm sorry, but in no world does that make any sense. You just fabricated shit. You can't do that. You can't just contradict yourself like that, mate.
Does worry China. The US has warned Xi is considering sending weapons to Putin, but many analysts are more cautious.
Much of the priority for this visit will be given on the diplomatic support, firstly, that Beijing can offer Russia. I think Beijing will just carry on conducting the normal trade agreement with Moscow, but not necessarily increasing the level of so-called civil military complex equipments and sending to Moscow.
Yeah, she's probably right. I think the realistic way to look at this is that not much will change between China and Russia. They will continue what they have. It'll be more of the same. China is certainly not going to assist Russia militarily, and probably just continue diplomatic support. I think that's a realistic way to look at things.
Russia's exports to China have soared over the past year by nearly 50%, taking bilateral trade to a record high of $190 billion and helping Russia offset some of the damage from Western sanctions. But that pales in comparison to China's links with the European Union, valued at more than 4 times that.
Oh wow, no way, you're kidding me, right? China has more trade with 23 countries compared to Russia is one country? No way. Seriously?
That relationship would be at risk if China began providing Russia with lethal aid. But China has been happy to hold military drills like this one in the Gulf of Oman alongside Russian forces, and has been exporting dual-use technology already. But China is now also positioning itself as a peacemaker on the global stage. Recently broker...
Okay, I actually oppose this. This is something that I criticise China on. I actually am deeply opposed to this. Saudi Arabia is a genocidal, murderous state. They have supported the USA in almost every violent act that they've carried out in the Middle East. Yemen is starving because of Saudi-backed blockades. Palestinians are continually killed and persecuted by Israel and Saudi-backed forces. These people are brutal. The political system of Saudi Arabia is brutal, and in no civilized world would Saudi Arabia exist. and I don't think any peace can be done by signing a piece of paper. And I don't think signing a piece of paper with Iran will stop any of these disgusting things that Saudi Arabia is doing. They need to be internationally condemned, and this means nothing really, and I don't know why China wants to do that. There's certainly other issues around the world that China could be assistant of. This is not one.
A resumption of ties between arch rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran. China has issued a 12-point proposal on the conflict in Ukraine, though its calls for an abandonment of a Cold War mentality have led it to be dismissed in the West.
Many of the global South countries do not see these wars eye to eye as the collective West. So I think what China is trying to do is trying to save its reputation with the global South.
No, China literally does not need to save their reputation in the global South. Lots of the global South look up to China, and if you compare how the West, the Western Europe and the USA compared to China, how they've both approached Africa and the third world, you'll see that China has been a lot more helpful and actually shown understanding and support and interest in actually helping. Whereas what the West is doing right now is just reinforcing their colonial mindset into Africa and further exploiting them. China isn't in Africa and Latin America to exploit them. They're there to build infrastructure programs and feed people. They're there to help with sustainable development. They're there to give people jobs. And these economies have started booming since China has helped African nations. For example, China is actually seen much better on the international stage than America is from a third worldist, Africanist perspective. So that's absolute horseshit. China does not need to save their reputation. The reputation is doing just fine.
And also somehow try to play, taking the momentum that it could possibly play a mediation role between Russia and Ukraine.
Xi Jinping is scheduled to have a call with Ukraine's President Zelensky, but his stance is one of pro-Russian neutrality. And in any case,
pro-Russian neutrality. What does that even mean? Shut up.
For now, both sides seem set on attempting to make more gains on the ground.
Well, I've been speaking to the Democratic Party US Congressman Bill Keating, who's a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Armed Services Committee, and I started by asking him why the US government is concerned by Xi's visit to Russia.
First worry is that somehow it will result in China giving arms to Russia in its aggression against Ukraine. I think that's unlikely. But the second concern is somehow trying to back a proposal that would freeze the illegal territory that Russia seized and somehow cast that out as an agreement for a ceasefire, which anything of that nature really isn't an agreement. And we have to remember, China's really not in a position to mediate this issue because they've taken Russia's side.
I mean, if you...
Are you serious right now? China can't help mediate peace because they've chosen Russia's side. So does that mean that the West can't mediate or help either because they've clearly taken Ukraine's side and turned Ukraine into technically a satellite state? I hope it works both ways. I hope it works both ways, bro. I hope you're not being a hypocrite here.
That China can't broker any kind of peace because it's taken Russia's side, then obviously the US and NATO countries couldn't broker any peace for the same reason.
Damn, bro read my mind.
Because they've taken Ukraine's side. Well, who could?
Certainly, let's not forget this. Putin can end this with a phone call immediately. And
what? No, he can't. This war isn't one man's decision.
So he's the aggressor. China can modify where they are.
Oh my God, you're a dumbass Democrat. Putin can't stop this by himself. Are you serious right now? What? And Russia isn't the aggressor. They've spent every moment since 2000 defending human rights of people in South Ossetia, in Abkhazia, in Chechnya, in Transnistria, and now Luhansk and Donetsk. Russia has spent all of their time since 2000 supporting sovereignty and defending human rights. They're not being aggressors, they're protecting people from persecution. What are you talking about?
Part of the agreement. But any agreement that China, and certainly the 12 points they have now, they all indicate that that land that was illegally gathered because of really the first major aggression since World War II in Europe remains with Russia.
Also bullshit. No, this is not the biggest act of aggression since World War II. What about the NATO expansion? What about the expansion of NATO? And what about the destruction of Yugoslavia? The absolute NATO-backed destruction of Yugoslavia that killed tens of thousands of lives and ruined that country, broke it up into 6 or 7 smaller states, caused violence that hadn't been seen in decades under socialist Yugoslav rule. Yugoslavia was a peaceful, prosperous, stable country, and NATO destroyed it, displaced hundreds of thousands. That was probably the first proper act of violence since World War II, not what's happening here. A NATO expansion, the fact that NATO has gobbled up former Warsaw Pact countries and westernized them and pushed degenerate liberal democracy onto them, that is also an act of aggression. So get your facts right.
So I think that's what I meant in terms of they can't be honest brokers, because when you start with that as a premise, you've already, I think, ceded any moral authority to be a mediator.
If you step back from this, I mean, the relationship between the US and China is seemingly getting worse. I mean, whose failure is that?
Well, I think it's important, number one, that discussions always occur, because even if you have competing countries with different interests, dialogue is important. And I think that's what you're going to see with the postponed visit, coming to fruition in terms of the two sides agreeing with each other. But I think that what we're seeing globally is really a contest with the authoritarian countries and the democratic countries.
Okay, yeah, I already kind of explained this at the very start of this video, but yeah, this authoritarianism versus democracy dichotomy is extremely stupid. Both authoritarianism and democracy are not universal concepts. They look different in different countries based on the traditions, values, and cultures of those countries. That isn't common sense. Stop being so black and white. There's more nuance to this that's required.
Do you think this President Biden, what is his foreign policy goal in terms of China? Is it to...
Dude, I highly doubt Joe Biden remembers what his foreign policy strategy is. Seriously? The dude can't even string a goddamn sentence together.
to normalize and to improve relations, or is it to be prepared to see confrontation if that's where it's going?
Certainly the U.S.'s position is not to seek confrontation unnecessarily. I believe that we're going to be strong together, meaning the Western side. One of the things that, as you look at the whole situation...
Stronger together as the West. Just a reminder that the West, what he's talking about being the West, being Western Europe and North America, mathematically, that region, the West, only makes up 15% of countries globally. So we have the whole rest of the world that is not being considered here. So that just shows where these imperialist interests are. They don't actually care about what's right or wrong. They are worried about their interests being damaged, their minority interests. But yeah, 15%. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about the West. It's a very tiny minority of countries that exist.
Since Russia's aggression against Ukraine, it's brought the Western countries together. But they're together not just militarily. You're looking at the energy issues that we've worked out together, so that Russia can't use, energy as a weapon of war. You're looking at the beginnings of trade with the Technology Council together, moving forward on issues. So I'm not afraid of competition. I don't think the U.S. is afraid of competition.
Yes, they are. That's lies. The US is shitting themselves right now, and they have been for years, because China is rising, China is coming, and one day China will supersede the United States. It's gonna happen. You are shitting yourselves. Stop lying.
With China, you can't ignore China in this world. But rather than just be responsive, rather than just watch what they're doing. The message I'm getting from so many countries and leaders I talk to throughout the world is for the US and our European allies to show up, be there, be a part of the things economically that China is trying to, move forward to on their own, to use not just for economic gain, but to use it for a political wedge and greater authoritarian rule.
When it comes
Oh, okay. So, yeah. So when China does well and rises economically, it's authoritarianism. But when the USA does the same thing, it's called freedom and democracy and prosperity. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
to China, how much difference do you honestly think there is between the Democrats and the Republicans?
No different at all. They're both the fucking same.
How worried should Europe be about forthcoming American elections?
Well, I think that there's a concern. I'll be honest with you.
There's a good analogy I want to give you guys. It's by a Chinese politician, and he very famously said that in the USA, you can change the party, but you can't change the policy. But in China, you can change the policy, but you can't change the party. And that just shows that it doesn't actually matter if you have a partisan country or not. The political changes that have happened in China over the few decades have been massive, despite there only being one party. Whereas, on the contrary, the two-party system in the USA, not much has actually changed. A lot stagnated. So it just shows that it doesn't actually matter, and that's a pretty good analogy that I'd like. So, just because China is a one-party state doesn't mean that they don't listen and can't perform radical, much-needed changes to improve the people's lives.
As I've talked to leaders around the world, there was a concern over the 4 years of the Trump administration, frankly, and the fragmentism and some of the actions that were taken that were divisive. Some of the ambassadorships and some of the other statements that were made that frankly did not respect our allies across the seas. But I do think that those years won't be repeated. And I can say that with great surety.
Congressman, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Holy shit, thank God that is over. That was brutal. But yeah, that's me done. I'm going to wrap it up here. I really, really hope you enjoyed this debunking. I know this was a little bit different than what I usually do, but yeah, give me feedback, comrades. Please give me feedback. Let me know what you thought. I can certainly do more of these videos. But hell yeah, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.